The explosion rippled through the underdeck of the Trinari research vessel like a metal beast waking from a terrible dream. Shards of composite plating shrieked across the corridor. Steam hissed from ruptured coolant lines, and alarms stuttered into a chorus of panic. Yarik Ward was thrown off his feet, slammed hard against the bulkhead, and crumpled to the floor. For a moment, he lay still, eyes fluttering open to a haze of smoke and flickering lights. Pain screamed through his side, hot and deep. He tried to sit up, but his right leg didn't move right. Something was definitely broken. Emergency response to Deck 7 came the trembling voice over the intercom. We have a human casualty, repeat, human casualty. Footsteps pounded from down the corridor, a mix of rhythmic thumps and skittering pads. Yarik twisted his neck, wincing. A tall, pale blue figure rounded the corner, followed by two others. Their elongated limbs moved with mechanical precision, eyes glowing a faint green under their translucent lids. Human is conscious, said the lead medic, voice flat but oddly concerned. Severe trauma to the lower extremity. Possible internal injuries. Begin stabilization. Yarik blinked the smoke from his eyes and tried to wave them off. I'm fine, he muttered, voice hoarse. Just a little scratch. The three medics froze, their heads all turning toward each other in perfect unison. The lead one, who had introduced itself earlier as Kelrin, leaned closer. You have sustained a compound fracture to your femur, multiple lacerations, and signs of blunt force trauma. You are not fine. Yarik exhaled sharply. A laugh or a grunt, it was hard to tell. Yeah, well, I've had worse. You may be experiencing shock, Kelrin said, and turned to the assistant. Administer sedative and prepare for medical transfer. No sedative, Yarik said quickly, eyes sharpening. I need to stay awake. You are not in a state to make that decision. I'm not unconscious, am I? There was a brief pause. Kelrin tilted his head. No, then I'm making it. No sedative. Another pause. Kelrin gave a subtle nod and the other medic hesitated, then lowered the injector. Yarik tried to shift his weight but groaned as the pain flared in his leg. His flight suit was soaked with blood along the thigh, the fabric torn wide. One of the medics carefully slid a support brace under his leg and began scanning with a handheld device. Femoral artery is intact, it said. No immediate threat of exsanguination. Good to hear, Yarik muttered, biting down on a wave of nausea. You are experiencing intense pain, Kelrin said. You do not appear to be reacting appropriately. Oh, I'm reacting, Yarik said through clenched teeth. Just not screaming. Yet, the medics exchanged another glance. One of them activated a hovering gurney that silently drifted into position. With practiced ease, they secured Yarik onto it, stabilizing his leg and strapping him in. As the gurney began to float down the corridor, Kelrin walked beside it, watching him with unreadable eyes. Do all humans respond to grievous injury by minimizing it? Yarik coughed. No, just the stubborn ones. You are bleeding, concussed, and have a broken femur. You referred to it as a little scratch. Yeah, well, what else am I gonna call it? Yarik's voice was fading now. A disaster? They reached the medical bay in under 3 minutes. The room was bright and humming with sterile energy. Sleek machines moved along rails in the ceiling, and a long bench of diagnostic equipment scanned Yarik the moment he crossed the threshold. Kelrin gestured to the others and they began prepping for surgery. Yarik looked around bleary-eyed. Where's Captain Gilo? He asked. She is unharmed, Kelrin replied. Your concern is noted. Now remain still. A ceiling-mounted arm descended and began spraying a cool antiseptic mist over his wounds. The sharp sting along his leg made him hiss, and his hands clenched the sides of the gurney. Kelrin noticed. We can administer pain suppression now. Yeah, Yarik said hoarsely. Okay, maybe now. The injector hissed against his neck and warmth spread through his chest. His heart rate slowed and the trembling in his hands eased. The pain didn't vanish, but it dulled enough that he could breathe properly again. Kelrin turned toward a nearby console, examining the scans. There is a clean break in the femur. Surgical alignment and stabilization will be required. Estimated recovery time 6 to 8 weeks, assuming no complications. Yarik stared at the ceiling. 6 weeks, huh? Guess I'm missing the Nover summit. Kelrin looked at him. You should be concerned about walking again. Oh, I am, Yarik replied. But that summit was gonna have those fire fruit pastries. Kelrin made no comment, but the assistant medic let out a soft, half-confused noise. The surgery began within the hour. Yarik was conscious for the first part, watching as the medics worked with a quiet efficiency that was almost hypnotic. One of the machines extended a skeletal arm that inserted a narrow titanium rod along the broken femur, guided by real-time imaging. Once the bone was aligned and anchored, tissue repair agents were applied and a low-frequency stimulator buzzed softly near his skin. When it was over, Yarik was moved to recovery and placed under monitored sedation for the night. The next morning, he woke to a dull ache in his leg and the sound of hushed voices near the doorway. He shouldn't be conscious yet, one of the medics said. He metabolized the sedatives faster than expected. Human physiology is irregular. Yarik cleared his throat. I'm irregular now? The voices stopped. Kelrin stepped into view. You are awake. And coherent. Leg feels like it went 12 rounds with a hydraulic press, Yarik said, shifting slightly. But yeah, coherent. Kelrin nodded. That is consistent with post-operative expectations. A nurse entered and checked the monitors. She adjusted the 4 and handed Yarik a small device. This is a pain regulator. Squeeze it if the discomfort becomes unacceptable. Yarik looked at the device. What happens if I squeeze it just a little? It administers a calibrated dose. Good. He held it loosely, not squeezing it yet. His mind wandered to the explosion. The underdeck had been undergoing maintenance. Faulty pressure valves. He'd gone to inspect a reading spike, standard stuff. But something didn't add up. Have you figured out what caused the blast? He asked. Kelrin paused. Preliminary findings suggest sabotage. Yarik's brow furrowed. Sabotage? Who would? We are investigating. Until then, this section of the ship is restricted. Yarik exhaled slowly. He glanced at his leg, now encased in a high-tech brace that was regulating pressure and temperature. How long before I can put weight on it? 3 weeks minimum. Full mobility may take longer. Yarik nodded. Guess I'll be watching a lot of Trinari documentaries. Your optimism is statistically inconsistent with the average human response to impairment. Yeah, well, maybe I'm below average. Kelrin tilted his head. Or above. Yarik chuckled, then winced. Don't make me laugh. It hurts. Over the next few days, the pain lessened but never fully left. He began physical therapy by the 5th day, just minor toe movements and isometric exercises. Kelrin remained a constant presence, observing, asking questions, documenting every bizarre inconsistency in Yarik's healing process. Why did his inflammation markers fluctuate so wildly? Why did his mood remain stable despite pain levels? Why did he insist on doing light shoulder stretches when his leg was still immobilized? You are not expected to train your upper body, Kelrin pointed out one afternoon. Yeah, but I don't want to come out of this looking lopsided. Kelrin blinked slowly. Your priorities continue to confound me. Days turned to weeks. Yarik moved from bed to crutches, then to a walker. The titanium rod was holding and his bones were knitting well. Still, every session of therapy left him drenched in sweat and gasping from effort. He didn't joke as much during those times. He listened, followed instructions, and focused. Recovery was slow, frustratingly so, but he never complained about the schedule. Only the food. Who designed this nutrient paste? He muttered one morning. Punishment committee? Kelrin glanced at the tray. It is optimal for bone growth and tissue repair. Optimal doesn't mean edible. I will make a note for culinary review. Great. Tell them to add salt. Or hope. By the end of the 6th week, Yarik was walking short distances with a cane. He still limped, and the surgical site ached when the weather changed, though, on a ship that was more metaphorical than real. He returned to the underdeck once, escorted by security. The scorched corridor had been sealed off, but he could still smell the faint tang of burned wiring. "Any progress on the sabotage?" he asked. Kelrin beside him nodded. "We identified the source. A timed charge placed inside the maintenance panel, set to detonate during your inspection window." Yarik's stomach tightened. "So it wasn't random?" "No. You were the target." He absorbed that in silence. Then he turned, leaned slightly on his cane, and looked Kelrin in the eyes. "I want to help find whoever did this. You are still recovering. I didn't say I chased them down. Just help." Kelrin considered, then gave a slow nod. "Very well. But do not refer to future injuries as little scratches. It causes considerable confusion." Yarik managed a tired grin. "No promises." The lights in the medical diagnostics lab were dimmed to a soft bluish hue, meant to keep patients calm, but it just made Yarik squint harder at the holographic display. He was seated on a padded exam bench, one leg braced and stiff, the other swinging idly. His cane rested against the wall behind him, slightly scuffed at the handle from being knocked over more than once. Kelrin stood nearby, arms folded in an unusually tense posture for a Trinari. The lab's central console displayed a slowly rotating image of the bomb fragment retrieved from the underdeck. "It wasn't Trinari tech," Yarik said, leaning forward. "That curve in the casing, it's too irregular. Trinari manufacturing's cleaner than that." Kelrin didn't blink. "Correct. The alloy composition aligns with human industrial sources. However, the triggering mechanism used a microfusion relay not found in any Earth origin devices. That's not something you build with scraps and a soldering kit," Yarik murmured. "Which means someone had access to both sides." Kelrin walked to the wall interface and brought up a list of crew assignments. "We've narrowed it to personnel with unrestricted access to maintenance sectors and off-ship procurement clearance." "Let me guess," Yarik said, swinging his good leg back and forth. "That's still over a dozen people?" 13, Kelrin confirmed, "including one chef, 2 junior hydro engineers, and your diplomatic attaché." Yarik exhaled. "Riss?" "She's barely tall enough to reach the emergency override panel. She is of interest due to her prior involvement in unauthorized data transfers." "That was a spreadsheet misfire," Yarik said. "She thought she was sending inventory logs to the galley. Instead, she emailed a Sarnathian trade protocol to the waste management unit." Kelrin didn't respond. He tapped the console and the display shifted to a timeline of ship activity the day of the explosion. 3 minutes before detonation, the maintenance logs were altered. The timestamp was overwritten. Yarik leaned closer. "That's a tight window. We believe whoever planted the charge knew your inspection schedule. It was not a general act of sabotage. It was targeted." Yarik stared at his own name on the log, blinking slowly. "Then I need to know why." Kelrin tilted his head. "You suspect motive." "I don't believe in random anymore," Yarik said. "Not after you almost lose a leg to it." A soft chime interrupted. The lab door slid open and a new figure entered, taller than Kelrin, skin a dusky aquamarine with a cluster of metallic implants along one shoulder. Yarik recognized her from a briefing weeks ago. Dr. Versha, Trinari behavioral analyst. She rarely engaged directly with humans. She approached without preamble. "Your recovery exceeds projections. Are you intentionally amplifying your healing process?" "I'm eating the paste," Yarik said. "That's got to count for something." Versha looked unimpressed. "Other humans would still require assisted mobility. You've resumed unsupported walking in under 5 days." "It's not unsupported," Yarik said. "It's wobbly. There's a difference." She turned to Kelrin. "I've reviewed his psychological profile. There's no sign of masochism or delusional bravado." Kelrin nodded. "I concur." Yarik raised a hand. "You're talking like I'm not in the room." Versha turned back to him. "We're evaluating how your species tolerates trauma. You've displayed atypical thresholds." Yarik shrugged. "We adapt. That's our thing." Versha narrowed her eyes. "Adaptation doesn't explain your cognitive stability under prolonged discomfort, or your willingness to participate in active investigations during convalescence." "You want me to lie in bed and think about how close I came to dying?" "Yes." "Well, that's not how I work." Yarik pushed himself carefully off the bench, testing his weight on the injured leg. The brace clicked softly as he shifted. "I do better when I'm moving." Versha watched him without blinking. "You're aware that your insistence on movement could cause micro tears in the regenerating tissue?" "Yup. And yet you proceed. Because the alternative is lying still and replaying the moment my hearing went silent and I couldn't feel my leg." Versha took a step back. Something unreadable passed across her expression. "I see." Kelrin gestured toward the display. "He's requested involvement in the investigation. I believe his insight may be valuable." Versha's gaze lingered on Yarik for a moment longer. Then she nodded once. "Then keep him under observation." "I'm right here," Yarik muttered. Kelrin powered down the display. "You can begin by reviewing personnel movement logs from the 24-hour window prior to the detonation. Send them to my console," Yarik said. "I'll go through them tonight." "You will go through them under supervision," Kelrin corrected. "Your neural fatigue index is elevated." Yarik gave a dry laugh. "You ran a brain scan on me while I was talking?" "You were already seated." A few hours later, Yarik was back in his quarters, propped up in a recliner with a thin display pad across his lap. The lights were dimmed to a warm amber now, and a cooling pack was strapped around his knee, buzzing faintly every 8 seconds. Kelrin stood nearby, arms behind his back. He hadn't spoken in a while. "You don't need to babysit me," Yarik said, not looking up. "You are not being babysat." "Sure, and I'm not limping." Kelrin moved closer. "I am observing your cognitive pattern during investigative analysis. It is directly relevant to our data. Right? You're not making a report about how fast I scroll through personnel manifests, are you?" "No. But I am noting that you've paused on the same name 3 times. Yarik tapped the screen. "Because it's odd." Veshin Lurok Sanitation Tech logged into the waste chute access panel 30 minutes before the detonation. That panel's 4 meters from the maintenance hull breach. Kelrin leaned in. He claimed he was rerouting pressure valves due to a vapor leak. Except there was no vapor leak recorded on the main logs. Kelrin was already accessing the central archive. "You believe this discrepancy is significant?" "I believe someone made him cover for something. Or he's very unlucky." Kelrin's eyes flickered as he processed the data. "He has no disciplinary history. Low social contact. No recorded grievances. That's what makes him perfect," Yarik said. "No one notices the guy who's always on time and never complains." Kelrin closed the data pad. "I will request an interview. I want to be there. You are not cleared for interrogations." "I'm not going to interrogate him," Yarik said. "I'm going to talk." Kelrin studied him. "You believe he'll respond more openly to a fellow human?" "I think he'll respond to someone who doesn't ask questions like a surveillance drone." The next morning, Yarik entered the observation room using a mobility harness that reduced pressure on his healing leg. Versha monitored from behind a one-way pane, arms folded. Veshin sat in the adjoining room, fidgeting with a data slate, unaware he was being observed. Yarik stepped into the chamber. Veshin looked up, startled. "Ambassador Ward?" "Don't stand," Yarik said. "I'm halfway robotic at this point." Veshin gave a nervous laugh. "I didn't expect to see me walking, or at all. I didn't think this was my level." Yarik pulled out a chair and eased into it with a grunt. "I've been going over logs. You were near the blast site." "I was rerouting a valve," Veshin said quickly. "There was a leak." "There's no record of that leak." Veshin's fingers tightened around the slate. "Look," Yarik said, voice quieter now. "I'm not here to accuse you. I get it. Sometimes people tell you to do something and you don't ask why." "I didn't know what it was," Veshin said suddenly. "They just said to override the panel for a few minutes. Said it was for recalibration." "Who told you?" Veshin hesitated. "I'm not going to let them pin this on you, Veshin. But I need a name." Veshin looked down at his hands. "I didn't see a face. But the voice, it wasn't Trinari. It had the clicks. Like the Drosari." Yarik leaned back slowly. "That narrows it." Veshin looked up. "Am I going to be detained?" No, but you're going to stay in secure quarters. For your safety. He stood, adjusting the harness, and limped toward the door. Versha met him outside. That was effective, she said. He's not lying, Yarik said. He's scared out of his mind, but he's telling the truth. Kelrin approached from the hallway. The Drosari delegation docked 3 days before the explosion. And left the day after, Yarik said. Perfect window. Versha tapped her wrist console. I'll request access to their departure logs. If they brought anything off ship, we'll find it. Yarik nodded once. And double-check the maintenance crew. I want to know who had contact with the Drosari while they were here. Kelrin turned to him. You were supposed to be recovering. I am recovering, Yarik said. Just not quietly. Kelrin's eyes narrowed slightly. We will need to recalibrate our expectations for human resilience. Yeah, Yarik said, turning down the corridor, cane tapping softly. You really will. Yarik didn't like formal hearings, but he liked being accused of fabricating sabotage even less. The inquiry room on Deck 3 was shaped like a crescent, with tiered seating along the back wall where Trinari observers watched silently. No one spoke unless prompted. The only human present besides Yarik was Commander Salen, head of interspecies security. She stood off to the side, arms folded, her expression unreadable. At the center of the room, Yarik stood with both hands gripping his cane, the brace on his leg concealed beneath the loose fabric of the regulation trousers Kelrin had insisted he wear. A thin film of sweat clung to his temple, not from nerves, but from the effort it had taken to walk the full corridor length to reach the chamber. Versha addressed him from the elevated platform. Ambassador Ward, your report specifies that the Drosari technician, identified only by voice, instructed Veshin to override the maintenance panel. This interaction occurred without visual confirmation? That's right, Yarik said. The Drosari use vocal encryption when operating off-delegation protocols. It's not unusual for them to avoid facial contact during covert interactions. Was the voice recorded? One of the Trinari overseers asked. No, Yarik replied. The corridor's passive sensors were offline due to the maintenance routines. That wasn't coincidence. Kelrin stepped forward. We've verified that the sensors were disabled from within the ship's primary utilities node. The override originated from a console registered to a Drosari diplomat's assistant. The overseer tapped a command into the console in front of him. And the assistant in question? Departed with the Drosari delegation 2 rotations ago, Kelrin said. We filed a formal request for cooperation, but so far no reply. Versha folded her hands. The Trinari Council finds this active proven grounds for diplomatic censure. However, we must also address the human's conduct. You involved yourself in an investigation while under medical restriction. Yarik adjusted his stance. I didn't break any protocols. I reviewed logs. I asked questions. I didn't interrogate anyone, I didn't handle evidence, and I didn't leave my assigned quarters without clearance. You diverted healing resources to investigative work, Versha said. Your vitals showed strain. I'm not a delicate instrument, Yarik said. I can walk and think at the same time, even if one leg's metal now. You misunderstand, Versha replied. We are not criticizing your mobility. We are attempting to understand the logic behind choosing engagement over rest when your body was compromised. Yarik looked up at the ring of tall, silent observers. Because if I sat around doing nothing, I'd have gone crazy. I needed to know who tried to kill me. That's not irrational. That's human. One of the back row Trinari leaned forward. And what would you have done if you had identified the saboteur yourself? I would have told Kelrin, Yarik said. What do you think I'd do, throw my cane at them? That got a subtle ripple of movement among the observers. Hard to tell if it was amusement or discomfort. Versha's expression didn't change. Reviewing the data, we find no procedural breach. Your assistants helped isolate the saboteur's method and timeline. However, you are not cleared for investigative roles aboard this vessel. I'm not asking to be, Yarik said. I just didn't want to sit out a murder attempt like it was a rain delay. Kelrin stepped forward again, requesting this inquiry be concluded. We have confirmed the source of sabotage and the human's involvement directly contributed to the resolution. No one objected. Versha nodded once. You are dismissed, Ambassador. Yarik turned to leave. gripping his cane tighter than necessary. Outside the chamber, the corridor was quieter. The Trinari walked in silent pairs, never speaking louder than a whisper. Yarik leaned against the wall to rest his leg. After a few moments, Kelrin joined him. "You dislike hearings," Kelrin said. "I dislike needing to defend not dying," Yarik muttered. Kelrin tilted his head. "You were never under suspicion. Didn't feel that way. Perhaps that is a human pattern. Expecting blame when survival is inconvenient." Yarik gave a dry laugh. "You're not wrong." They continued down the corridor together. Yarik's limp had improved slightly. He didn't need to pause as often. Later that cycle, he returned to the medical wing for a final scan. The diagnostic table was cold under his back, and the overhead scanner hummed to life with a low, pulsing rhythm. Dr. Jolin, a Trinari with mottled lavender skin and a permanent squint, adjusted the scan parameters. "You've exceeded all tissue regeneration benchmarks," she said. "Bone density around the implant is stabilizing. Does that mean I can ditch the brace? In 2 days, the internal support will hold without external restriction, but no impact activities for at least another month. No sprinting, no acrobatics." "Got it." Jolin tapped the console. "You also need to increase hydration. Your electrolyte levels are inconsistent." Yarik sighed. "I've been drinking the synth water. Then drink something that doesn't taste like recycled air." He sat up gingerly and swung his legs over the side. "I'll find a juice box." When he left the med bay, he didn't head to his quarters. Instead, he made his way to the observation deck, where the stars stretched in every direction like a frozen storm. The windows were 3 stories tall, curved at the top, and the silence inside felt like it had weight. Kelrin joined him not long after. No words for a while. They just stood there, 2 figures silhouetted against a moving galaxy. Finally, Kelrin spoke. "You are cleared to return to Earth facilities when we next reach orbit." "Good," Yarik said. "But I'm staying until then." Kelrin nodded. "You've demonstrated a pattern of remaining in places after injury. I'm stubborn. Or sentimental. Perhaps both." They watched a meteor belt drift past, tiny specks of rock glowing faintly against the black. "You realize," Kelrin said, "that your reaction to trauma has been recorded in 12 separate Trinari academic journals. Let me guess, case study in recklessness? No. In adaptability under physiological duress." Yarik crossed his arms. "That's nicer than what I was expecting." Kelrin turned toward him. "We've learned more from your recovery than we expected. Not only in biology, but in temperament. You treat damage not as failure, but as interruption." "That's because it is," Yarik said. "You don't stop being yourself just because something breaks." Kelrin was silent for a moment. There was concern. "After the explosion, that your mental state would deteriorate, that you would experience instability." "I did," Yarik said. "For about 30 seconds. Right after I woke up and realized I couldn't feel my leg. Then I got over it. That is not typical. It's not about being typical. It's about being too stubborn to stay broken." Kelrin looked at him for a long moment. "You astonish us. I get that a lot." "No," Kelrin said. "You misunderstand. It is not astonishment in the sense of surprise. It is astonishment as in recalibration. Your behavior forces us to reconsider what we thought was possible in your species." Yarik smiled faintly. "Glad I could be educational. You've changed the medical protocols for interspecies trauma response. I'm not a textbook." "Not yet," Kelrin said. "But you will be." They stood there a while longer. The stars didn't rush. There was no urgency in space. Eventually, Yarik stretched his arms and turned back toward the corridor. "I've got 2 more days with this brace, then I plan to walk the perimeter without stopping." Kelrin followed. "That is unwise. Wouldn't be the first time. You will be observed." "Of course I will. Everyone wants to see how the human walks again." Kelrin paused. "No. They want to see the one who got up." Yarik didn't answer. He just tapped his cane once against the floor and kept walking. By the time the brace came off, there were no more investigations, no more hearings, and no more unanswered questions. The Drosari denied involvement, but with internal logs and intercepted communications now circulating among Allied fleets, their reputation was already under review. Veshin was reassigned to a less exposed post under Trinari protection. No charges were filed. He still wouldn't make eye contact with Yarik, but he did nod once, which was enough. Versha submitted a report to the council. It concluded with an addendum. Human resilience exceeds projection under adverse conditions, particularly when identity and personal agency are perceived to be threatened. Further study is warranted. Yarik never read it. He didn't need to. When the ship docked 3 days later at the orbital platform above Europa, Yarik stepped off without assistance. The cane stayed behind, resting against the wall outside his quarters. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. Everything hurt just a little less now.